I spent years scraping together every dollar to buy my first home. When the time finally came, my parents persuaded me to put it under their name, just for legal protection, they said. A year later, they handed it to my brother as a wedding present. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I just walked away. 6 months of silence passed before they started calling nonstop. My mom texted that morning, "Come home after work. We haven't seen you in a while. Let's have dinner." It had been a brutal week. I almost said no, but some fragile remnant of the daughter who used to put family first, out of habit, guilt, or love, made me say yes. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped through the door. Balloons, a banner that read, "Congratulations, Daniel and Sophia." They were at the table, hands clasped, faces glowing. Laughter filled the room like I'd just wandered into a celebration I was never invited to. I froze, fingers tightening on my purse strap. "What's all this?" I asked. My mom lit up like she'd been waiting for me. "Rachel, perfect timing." I glanced around, confused. My dad stood, clapping Daniel on the back. "We have big news." Daniel smirked at me like it was obvious, and suddenly I felt it. That deep, gnawing twist in my gut. "We're giving them the house," my dad said, practically shining. "As a wedding gift." The words hit like a punch. I blinked. "You're what?" My mom laughed lightly, like I'd misunderstood. "Sweetheart, it just makes sense. Daniel and Sophia are starting their life. They need a home." I stared, mind reeling. Daniel beamed. "Crazy, right?" Sophia was so surprised. He turned to her, squeezed her hand. "We thought we'd have to rent, but now we can start with something stable." Stable. I'd worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, counted every dollar just to make that house a reality. And now it was theirs, handed over like a party favor. I swallowed hard. "That's my house." My dad sighed, already tired of me. "Rachel, it's not technically yours. It's in our name. You know that." "That's what they told me when I bought it. Just a formality, Rachel. For liability, nothing will change. I believed them. I trusted them." And now I was standing there, forgotten. My fingers curled around the purse strap like it was the only solid thing left. "I paid for it," I said, quieter now. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Come on, Ratch, don't be selfish." My head snapped toward him. Selfish? He was taking my home, and I was selfish. Sophia gave me that polished, patronizing smile. "You're so independent, Rachel. You'll be fine." That was always the excuse, wasn't it? I'd be fine. I was strong. I'd manage. While Daniel got everything handed to him, more help, more love, more of what I had to bleed for. I looked at my parents. "Do you really think this is fair?" My mom gave me that soft, empty smile. "It's what's best for the family." Not our family. His. I took a breath, slow and sharp. I could fight. I could scream. But for what? The house wasn't in my name, and they'd already made up their minds. So I just nodded, swallowed every word burning in my throat, and walked out. I didn't pack, didn't touch my room. I just stepped back into the night and left it all behind. Let them have it. Let them sink in the weight of their own choices. Because one day, I knew they'd regret this. They just didn't know it yet. I got in my car, started the engine, and gripped the wheel until my knuckles burned white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even think, because if I let myself feel it, I might have turned around and demanded they see what they'd done. But I knew better. They never would. So I just drove, eyes ahead, breath steady, making the only choice I had left. I had no choice but to figure things out on my own. It wasn't new. I'd been doing that most of my life. That same night, I found a short-term rental, a cramped little 1-bedroom apartment, barely enough space to breathe. But it was mine alone. The next morning, I handed over what was left of my savings, first month security deposit. And just like that, I had a new address. Not the home I'd sacrificed for, not the one I'd earned. But it was a roof over my head, a space no one could take from me. I threw myself into work like it was oxygen, picked up extra shifts, took on every project I could. I clawed my way up faster than I ever had, determined to build a life with no trace of them in it. And it paid off. 3 months later, I got promoted. With it came a raise, more than I'd ever made. For the first time, I could exhale. I wasn't budgeting down to the penny. I wasn't bailing anyone out. Every cent I earned was mine, and I was thriving. Meanwhile, silence. My parents, Daniel, nothing. No calls, no texts, no apologies. It was like I'd been erased. And that should have been fine. I told myself it was fine. But little things started to creep in. A coworker offhandedly mentioned, "Saw your mom the other day. She looked kinda off." A cousin messaged me on Facebook. "Everything okay with your family? Your dad seemed stressed." At first, I shrugged it off. They got what they wanted, didn't they? The house, the life, the dream. Everything was going according to plan. But then I checked social media one night. Daniel and Sophia had been chronicling their new chapter obsessively. Home tours, redecorating, cheesy captions about gratitude and fresh starts. And then, silence. No posts for weeks. Until a new photo popped up, just the two of them at a restaurant. And the caption made my stomach knot. Crazy how fast things change. No context, no details, just that vague, uneasy line. I scrolled through the comments, looking for answers. "Damn, man. Hope everything's okay. You guys are strong, you'll bounce back." Bounce back from what? I set my phone down, heart hammering. Something was wrong, but I wasn't going to be the one to ask. They'd shut me out, let them deal with it. Then, a week later, my phone lit up, my mom calling. I stared at the screen as it rang. I didn't answer. She called again an hour later. Then again, all ignored. The next morning, my dad, then Daniel. One by one, they all tried to reach me, and I let every call die in silence. Until a text came through from Daniel. "I know you're pissed, but we need to talk. It's important." I stared at it, reading it twice. Daniel never reached out first. Pride wouldn't let him, which meant something was seriously wrong. I typed back, "Why?" A few minutes passed. Then his reply came, "Just come home, please, home." Like I still had one. Like they hadn't taken it from me. I didn't respond, but for the first time since I walked away, I felt it. Something in their perfect little world was crumbling. I had no idea what I was walking into, even after Daniel's text. After the calls stacked up. After my mother filled my voicemail with that soft, desperate tone she always used when she wanted something, I stayed silent. They had ignored me for 6 months, vanished like I never existed. And now, suddenly, I was the one they all needed. I didn't believe for a second they wanted to make things right. No, this wasn't about guilt. It was about need. And I wasn't about to make it easy. But after 3 more days of constant buzzing, my curiosity finally cracked. I drove back to the house, not out of longing, not to talk, but because I had to see what had gone wrong. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew it was bad. The once pristine lawn was wild and patchy. The curtains were drawn tight, casting a dull shadow over the windows. But the real giveaway? A glaring orange foreclosure notice slapped onto the front door. I didn't even have time to fully register it before the door flung open and my mother rushed out. "Rachel," she looked worn, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, shadows etched deep under her eyes. She grabbed my arm like she was afraid I'd vanish again. "Thank God you're here." I pulled away. "What's going on?" She hesitated, then my dad stepped out behind her, rubbing his temples like the weight of the world was crushing him. "We need your help," he muttered. I crossed my arms. "With what?" Daniel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, face sour. He looked irritated, like I was the disruption, like he was the victim. I narrowed my eyes. "Someone explain." My mom wrung her hands, voice shaking. "It's the mortgage, Rachel. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We've fallen behind on payments." The words hit slow, like water filling a sinking boat. I let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. I never missed a payment. My dad looked away. I turned to Daniel. "How far behind are you?" His jaw clenched. "It's not my fault." I raised a brow. "Really?" "Because you're the one living here." He glared. "We just fell behind a little. The bank is overreacting." "How far behind, Daniel?" Silence. Then my mom's voice, low and ashamed. 5 months. My stomach dropped. 5 months wasn't a hiccup. It was freefall. I inhaled slowly, the pieces snapping together. Daniel had gambled it away. I knew the pattern. It had started with innocent bets, games with friends, low-stakes poker. Then it grew, got dangerous. I had always suspected our parents bailed him out, covered the cracks, but now, with the house in his name, he had burned through it all. And now they were begging. "You need to help us," my mom said, urgent. I tilted my head. "And why would I do that?" She blinked. "Rachel, this is your home too." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Funny, 6 months ago you told me to find somewhere else." My dad let out a long sigh, like I was the problem. "Look, we made a mistake, but the bank?" "You just need me," I cut in. Silence. No one argued, because they all knew I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the one they coddled, defended, rescued. But I was the one they depended on, the fixer, the one who always held the crumbling pieces together. I glanced at the foreclosure notice. If I walked away now, the bank would take the house within weeks, but this house was supposed to be mine, and maybe, just maybe, I could make that true again. I turned to Daniel. "How much do you owe?" His shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath. A little over 18,000. I nodded, already calculating. It was a lot. But with my promotion, my savings, and a clear plan, I could do it. I could save it. But this time, on my terms, but not for them, not for free. I crossed my arms. "I'll pay it." My mother gasped, her hands flying together like she'd just witnessed a miracle. "Oh, sweetheart, we knew we could count on you." "I have conditions," I cut in. My dad's face tightened. "Rachel." I held up a hand. "Number you don't get to argue." Silence. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "If I'm paying off your debt, then this house becomes mine, officially." My mom blinked, stunned. "What?" "You will sell it to me," I said flatly. "For cheap. A fraction of market value." The room shifted, like I'd dropped a match in a room full of gas. Daniel's face twisted with outrage. "You're trying to steal my house?" I tilted my head. "Your house? The one you couldn't even keep?" He opened his mouth to snap back, but my dad jumped in, his voice low and tense. "Rachel, that's not fair." I turned to him, cold and unwavering. "What's not fair is that I paid for this house, and you gave it away like it was a birthday gift." He clamped his jaw shut. He knew I had them cornered. No money, no options. And a foreclosure just days away. I was the only card they had left to play. My mother's face went pale. "You'd really do this?" I stared straight at her. "Yes." A long, heavy silence fell. Then, finally, my dad let out a broken breath and rubbed his forehead. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll sign the papers." I nodded, though my pulse thundered beneath my skin. I had won, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. Not until every signature was in ink. Not until the deed bore my name. Not until every last piece of paperwork was filed, notarized, and legally binding. I didn't trust them. I couldn't. I'd been the dependable one for years, the fixer, the helper, and they had weaponized that trust against me. Not this time. This time, there would be no loopholes, no vague promises, no turning back. And 2 weeks later, it was done. The house was legally mine again. We sat at the dining table, the same table where they once told me to pack my things. The same table where they handed everything I'd built to someone else. I slid a folded letter across to Daniel. He frowned, picking it up. "What's this?" I leaned back in my chair. "Your 1-month eviction notice." Silence. Then Daniel laughed, short, bitter. "You're joking." I tilted my head. "Do I look like I'm joking?" He scanned the paper, his smirk crumbling. "You can't be serious. You said you'd help us." I smiled. And I did. I paid off the debt. I saved the house. I bought it. I tapped the table between us. "Which means you don't live here anymore." My mother gasped, reaching for the letter with trembling hands. "Rachel, sweetheart, we never—" "You never what?" I asked, voice cool. "Never intended for me to get my house back?" My father looked away, guilty. "We just assumed," my mom began, "that I'd let Daniel and Sophia stay, indefinitely, rent-free?" I laughed, just once, sharp and cold. Number absolutely not. Sophia, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice tight, edged with panic. Rachel, where are we supposed to go? I raised a brow. I don't know, maybe your generous in-laws will take you in. Then I turned to my parents. Since you thought Daniel deserved this house more than I did, I'm sure you won't mind opening your doors to him. My dad's face darkened. Rachel, this is low. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Number you taking my house was low. This is just me fixing it. Daniel slammed the letter down like it might change something. You can't do this. I stayed seated, calm, eyes locked on his. I can, and I did. My mother's voice cracked, soft and trembling. We're family, Rachel. We don't do this to each other. I stared at her for a long, heavy beat, then leaned in, pressing my palms flat against the table. Families don't do what you did to me. She flinched like the words stung. I stood, adjusting the strap of my bag over my shoulder. You have 4 weeks to move out, I said, voice cool and final. I suggest you start packing. And with that, I turned and walked out. For the next month, they tried everything to change my mind. Daniel and Sophia flipped between desperate pleading and seething threats. Sophia called crying, saying they had nowhere to go. Daniel texted furious messages about how I was ruining his life. My parents called too, pleading, guilt-tripping, begging me not to tear the family apart over a misunderstanding. But I didn't answer, not once. I had already given too much. And on the final day of their eviction notice, I drove back, just to see for myself. The driveway was crowded with boxes. Daniel and Sophia stood by the car mid-argument, Sophia wiping away furious tears. My parents were helping them load everything, because now they had no choice. Daniel and Sophia were moving in with them. I rolled down my window, my voice light as air. All packed up? Daniel turned, his face a storm of rage. You're a real piece of work, you know that? I smiled. And you're a terrible tenant. Looks like we're all learning something today. My mother looked over, her eyes pleading. Rachel, please, don't do this. I stared at her, unreadable. You told me I'd find another place, remember? She sucked in a breath like I'd slapped her. I parked the car and stepped out, walking to the porch that was mine again. My steps were slow, measured, certain. You made your choice, I said, arms crossed as I turned back to them. Now you get to live with it? Sophia muttered something bitter under her breath, dragging the last suitcase to the car. Daniel stood there, fists clenched, eyes burning holes through me, but he knew. There was nothing left he could say, nothing he could do. They were leaving, and I was staying. I stepped into my house, finally my house, and closed the door behind me. This time, no one could take it away, not ever again.